The unexpected assignment. Victoria Hayes checked the address 3 times before turning her car into the long driveway. The mansion rose before her like something from a dream, all glass and stone perched on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She had been cleaning homes for 5 years since her husband passed, but nothing in her experience prepared her for this place. The agency had called it a special assignment. A wealthy client who valued privacy and precision. The pay was generous, perhaps too generous, which made her wonder what she was really walking into. The morning fog clung to the coastline, making everything look soft and unreal. Victoria gathered her supplies and approached the entrance, finding the key exactly where Mrs. Patterson said it would be. The heavy door swung open silently, revealing an interior that took her breath away. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space that somehow felt both magnificent and desperately empty. The first encounter. She moved quietly through the entrance hall, her footsteps muted on the polished marble floor. The house had that peculiar quality of spaces that are maintained but not truly inhabited. Everything gleamed, yet nothing felt alive. No scattered mail, no coffee cups left on tables, no signs of the small chaos that makes a house a home. It reminded her of a gallery after hours, beautiful but lonely. Victoria was setting up her supplies in the kitchen when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, but a presence. She turned and walked toward the main living area, following an instinct she could not name. That was when she saw him. A man stood perfectly still by the enormous window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He wore simple dark clothes and his posture suggested someone lost in thought. The morning light outlined his frame, turning him into a silhouette against the bright ocean beyond. Victoria hesitated, unsure whether to announce herself or retreat quietly. The agency had said the owner traveled frequently. Perhaps this was someone else, a relative or guest. Before she could decide, he spoke without turning. His voice was low, controlled, almost a whisper. "Don't move." The command that changed everything. Victoria froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was this a threat? Should she run? But something in his tone stopped her. It was not menacing. It was urgent, almost pleading. She stood completely still, barely breathing, her mind racing through possibilities. The man remained motionless by the window. Seconds stretched into a minute. The only sound was the distant crash of waves against the rocks below. Then she saw it. A flash of brilliant blue outside the window. A bird, unlike any she had seen before, landed on the exterior windowsill. Its feathers shimmered in shades of sapphire and turquoise, and its long tail feathers swayed gently in the breeze. "A blue-crowned motmot," the man said softly, still not moving. "They almost never come this far north. I have been watching for 3 years, hoping to see one." Victoria held her breath, captivated by the creature's beauty. The bird tilted its head, examining its reflection in the glass, seemingly unaware of the 2 humans watching from inside. Its presence felt like a gift, a moment of pure magic in the ordinary morning. For nearly 5 minutes, they stood frozen, united in silent appreciation of something rare and wonderful. Then the bird lifted off, its distinctive tail feathers trailing behind as it disappeared into the coastal fog. The man finally turned around. Meeting Nicholas Grant. He was younger than Victoria expected, perhaps mid-30s, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes that held a weariness she recognized. His face had strong features, but they were softened by exhaustion and something else. A deep sadness that seemed carved into his expression. He looked at her with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. "I apologize for startling you," he said, his voice warmer now. "I am Nicholas Grant. You must be from the agency." Victoria found her voice. "Victoria Hayes. I did not mean to intrude. I was told the house would be empty." "It usually is." He moved away from the window, and she noticed the slight stiffness in his movements, as if he had been standing still for too long. I cancelled my trip at the last minute. I forgot to notify the agency. He gestured toward the kitchen. Please, continue with your work. Pretend I am not here. But that was impossible, and they both knew it. The house suddenly felt different with him in it, less like a museum and more like a stage waiting for something to happen. Victoria nodded and returned to the kitchen, but she could feel his presence throughout the house like a magnetic pull. The beginning of understanding. As she worked, Victoria noticed details she had missed before. A photograph face down on a shelf. A second coffee mug in the cabinet, dusty from disuse. A pair of running shoes by the door, one with laces tied, one without, as if someone had stopped mid-motion and never returned. These were the artifacts of interrupted life, the small monuments to absence. She was dusting the living room when Nicholas appeared again, carrying 2 cups of tea. He offered one to her without a word. Victoria accepted it, surprised by the gesture. They stood together by the window where the bird had been, sipping tea in comfortable silence. My brother loved birds, Nicholas said suddenly. Thomas. He could identify any species by sound alone. He used to say that birds were proof that beauty still existed in the world, that you just had to pay attention. Victoria heard the past tense, understood its weight. He sounds like he was wise. He was. Nicholas stared out at the ocean. He died 2 years ago this week. I bought this house because he always dreamed of living by the water. I thought it would honor him. Instead, it just reminds me every day that he is not here to enjoy it. The honesty was unexpected, raw. Victoria recognized it because she carried her own grief like a stone in her chest. I lost my husband 3 years ago, she heard herself say. Hiking accident in Yosemite. One moment we were planning our future, the next I was planning his funeral. Sometimes I still set 2 places at the table by habit. Nicholas turned to look at her, really look at her, and something passed between them. Recognition. Not attraction exactly, though there was something electric in the air. It was deeper than that. 2 people who understood what it meant to be hollowed out by loss, who knew the exhausting work of pretending to be whole. The agreement. The house does not need much cleaning, Nicholas said. It barely gets dirty. But I find myself hoping you will come back tomorrow anyway. Victoria should have said no. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. But standing in that beautiful, lonely house with this broken man who somehow felt familiar, she found herself nodding. Tomorrow then. Same time. As she drove away that afternoon, the fog was lifting, revealing the brilliant blue of the ocean. Victoria thought about the bird, about Nicholas standing vigil by the window for 3 years waiting for something beautiful to appear. She thought about how sometimes the things we wait for arrive when we least expect them, in forms we never imagined. She did not know it yet, but her life had just changed. The moment he said, "Don't move," everything had shifted. Tomorrow would bring more conversations, more shared silences, more of the careful dance of 2 damaged people learning to trust again. The story was only beginning, and neither of them was ready for where it would lead, the return. Victoria arrived at the Grant mansion the next morning with a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The fog had cleared overnight, leaving the coastal sky brilliant and blue. She parked in the circular driveway and sat for a moment, gathering herself. This was just a job, she reminded herself. A client who needed housekeeping services. Nothing more. But her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the door. Nicholas was waiting in the sunroom, a space she had not fully explored the day before. It faced east, catching the morning light, and was filled with plants that someone clearly tended with care. He looked up from a book when she entered, and his expression brightened in a way that made her heart skip. "I was hoping you would come," he said simply. "I said I would." Victoria set down her supplies, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. "Should I start upstairs today?" Or you could have coffee with me first. He gestured to a second cup already poured and waiting. I realize I monopolized your time yesterday. But the house truly does not need much work. I have a service that comes monthly for deep cleaning. I think what I actually need is something else entirely. Victoria accepted the coffee and sat across from him. What do you need? Nicholas considered the question carefully. Company, I suppose. The kind where I do not have to pretend everything is fine. Does that sound strange? No. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. It sounds honest. Thomas's story. Over the next hour, Nicholas told her about Thomas. His younger brother by 3 years, brilliant and chaotic and full of life. They had started their company together, building technology that revolutionized data security. Thomas had been the creative force, the dreamer who saw possibilities everywhere. Nicholas had been the practical one, turning dreams into reality. He was reckless sometimes, Nicholas said, staring into his coffee. Always pushing boundaries, testing limits. I was constantly pulling him back, making him think through consequences. We balanced each other perfectly. The accident happened at their laboratory. Thomas was testing a new prototype, something he insisted was safe despite incomplete trials. There was a fire. The sprinkler system malfunctioned. By the time Nicholas reached him, it was too late. Thomas died holding his hand, apologizing for not listening. I sold the company 6 months later, Nicholas said. I could not walk into that building anymore. Everything reminded me that I should have stopped him. I should have been more insistent. I should have protected him better. Victoria listened without interrupting, recognizing the familiar patterns of grief and guilt. She had traveled this road herself, knew its twists and turns intimately. When Nicholas finally fell silent, she spoke quietly. My husband's name was James. We met in college, married young, planned everything together. He was a teacher, loved the outdoors, always dragging me on adventures I pretended to resist but secretly loved. Sharing the weight. The hiking trip had been his idea. A week in Yosemite for their 5th anniversary. The weather was perfect, the trails beautiful. On the 4th day, James wanted to photograph the sunrise from a particular viewpoint. Victoria was tired and stayed at camp. He went alone. They found him 3 hours later, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. He had slipped on loose rocks, fallen 30 feet. The ranger said death was instantaneous, that he did not suffer. But I keep thinking about those hours when I was sleeping peacefully while he was lying there alone. I should have gone with him. I should have insisted we stay together. Nicholas reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was simple but profound. His palm was warm against hers, and she realized how long it had been since anyone had offered her this kind of comfort. We carry impossible burdens, he said. Shouldering responsibility for things we could not control. But I am learning that guilt is just love with nowhere to go. The word struck Victoria like a bell. She had never heard it expressed that way before, but it was absolutely true. All this time, her guilt had been grief transformed, love that could no longer reach its intended recipient. The realization did not make the pain disappear, but it shifted something fundamental in how she understood it. They sat in silence, hands still clasped, while the morning light moved across the floor. Outside, waves crashed in their eternal rhythm. Inside, 2 people who had been alone for so long found unexpected solace in shared understanding. The gradual transformation. The days that followed established a new pattern. Victoria came each morning, and they spent less time on housework and more time simply being present together. She began to notice small changes in Nicholas. He smiled more easily. His posture relaxed. The house itself seemed to respond to the shift in energy. Victoria brought small touches of warmth to the sterile space. Fresh flowers in the kitchen. books arranged on tables instead of perfectly shelved. She opened windows that had been sealed shut, letting ocean breezes carry away the stagnant air. Nicholas watched these transformations with something like wonder, as if seeing his home for the first time. One afternoon, she found him in what had clearly been Thomas's room. It was preserved exactly as his brother had left it. Climbing gear in the corner. Books stacked haphazardly. A half-finished chess game on the desk. Nicholas stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. "I have not been in here since the funeral," he admitted. "I keep thinking if I change anything, I will lose the last pieces of him." Victoria understood the impulse. She still had boxes of James's belongings in storage, untouched for 3 years. But she also knew that preservation was not the same as honoring memory. "What would Thomas want?" she asked gently. Nicholas thought about this. "He would want me to live. He always said I was too serious, too cautious. He would hate knowing I turned his room into a shrine." Together, they began sorting through Thomas's things. Not erasing him, but integrating his memory into life rather than sealing it away. They kept his favorite books, displayed his photographs, donated his climbing gear to a youth program he had supported. It was painful work, but necessary. With each item they touched, Nicholas told stories. Victoria listened, laughing at the funny ones, sitting quietly through the sad ones. Music returns. The piano in the living room had been covered with a cloth. Nicholas explained that Thomas had played beautifully, filling the house with music during his visits. After his death, Nicholas could not bear to hear it. "I used to play too," he admitted. "Not as well as Thomas, but I enjoyed it. Now every time I look at it, I just hear silence." Victoria walked to the piano and lifted the cover from the keys. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light. She pressed middle C gently, and the note rang out pure and clear. "Play something," she said. "Anything. It does not have to be perfect." Nicholas hesitated, then sat on the bench. His fingers hovered over the keys as if afraid to make contact. Then slowly, tentatively, he began to play. The melody was simple at first, halting and uncertain. But gradually it found confidence, building into something beautiful and sad and achingly honest. When he finished, his hands were shaking. Victoria saw tears on his cheeks that he made no attempt to hide. "That was the last piece Thomas and I played together," he said. "A duet. I never thought I could play it again without him." "You just did." Victoria sat beside him on the bench. "And it was beautiful. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real." Nicholas turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. They sat close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. But Victoria stood abruptly, her professional instincts reasserting themselves. "I should finish the upstairs." Nicholas nodded, but disappointment flickered across his face. "Of course." The growing awareness. As weeks passed, their connection deepened in ways Victoria had not anticipated. Nicholas began leaving the mansion, venturing into town for the first time in months. He started running again, returning with wind-blown hair and color in his cheeks. He talked about reaching out to old friends, considering new projects, rejoining the world he had abandoned. Victoria watched these changes with joy and growing unease. She had come into his life during his darkest period, and her presence had somehow catalyzed healing. But what happened when he no longer needed her? What happened when his grief transformed enough that he could move forward alone? She found herself looking forward to their mornings together with an intensity that frightened her. The way he smiled when she arrived. The comfortable silence they could share. The conversations that ranged from profound to silly. She had not felt this way since James, and the realization terrified her. One evening, Nicholas asked her to stay for dinner. He had been cooking, rediscovering skills that had gone dormant. They ate on the terrace overlooking the ocean, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Wine loosened their tongues, and they talked about everything and nothing, laughing in ways that felt simultaneously natural and revolutionary. "I need to tell you something," Nicholas said as darkness fell. "These past weeks with you have changed my life. I was drowning before you arrived, and I did not even realize it. You threw me a lifeline without even knowing it." Victoria's heart pounded. "Nicholas, I just did what anyone would do." "No." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You did what only you could do. You understood without judgment. You shared your own pain, which gave me permission to acknowledge mine. You brought life back into this tomb I had built for myself." The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Victoria wanted to reach across the table, to close the distance that suddenly felt unbearable. But fear held her back. Fear of losing someone again. Fear of disrupting what they had built. Fear of her own feelings. "I should go," she said, standing quickly. "It is getting late." Nicholas stood too, confusion and hurt crossing his face. But he did not argue. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," she agreed, though her voice shook. "The piano plays alone." As Victoria drove home through the darkness, tears streamed down her face. She had promised herself after James that she would never love like that again. The risk of loss was too great, the potential for pain too devastating. But somehow, without meaning to, she had fallen for Nicholas Grant. Not because he needed saving, but because in saving each other, they had discovered something neither expected. Back at the mansion, Nicholas sat at the piano in the darkness. His fingers found the keys without needing light, playing the duet he had shared with his brother. But this time, he played both parts, filling in the spaces Thomas had left behind. The music soared through the empty house, no longer a lament but a celebration. A recognition that love does not end with death, it transforms, finding new expressions and new recipients. He played until his fingers ached, until the notes blurred together into a prayer. A hope that Victoria would return tomorrow and every day after. A belief that maybe, just maybe, they could build something beautiful from their shared brokenness. The ocean crashed against the rocks outside, eternal and unchanging. But inside the mansion, everything had shifted. Two hearts that had been frozen were thawing, slowly, painfully, beautifully. The story was reaching its turning point, and neither of them could stop what was coming next. The night deepened, and somewhere in the darkness, a blue-crowned motmot called out, its cry carrying across the water like a promise. 3 months later. Spring arrived on the California coast with an explosion of wildflowers. The cliffs around the Grant mansion transformed into a canvas of purple lupins, golden poppies, and bright red Indian paintbrush. Victoria had watched the season change from the windows she now knew so intimately, and with it, she had watched Nicholas transform as well. He was no longer the hollow man she had met that foggy morning. Color had returned to his face. Laughter came easily. He had reconnected with former colleagues and started consulting on new technology projects. The mansion itself had shed its museum quality, becoming something warm and lived in. Music often filled the rooms now. Books lay open on tables. Coffee cups sat on counters. It was a home at last. But with each positive change, Victoria felt herself pulling away. She had done what she came to do, helped him heal, brought life back into his world. Now it was time to step back before things became more complicated than they already were. Before her feelings grew deeper than she could manage. She had made her decision 2 days ago. Today would be her last visit, the final morning. Victoria let herself in just as the sun was breaking over the horizon. She had arrived earlier than usual, hoping to slip away before Nicholas woke. Her plan was to leave a note explaining that she was taking on new clients, that her schedule no longer allowed for regular visits, that he was doing wonderfully and no longer needed her services. All lies, of course. But necessary ones. She moved through the house one last time, touching surfaces that had become familiar friends. The piano where Nicholas had rediscovered music. The kitchen where they had cooked countless meals together. The sunroom where they had shared their deepest sorrows. Every corner held memories she would carry forever. In the living room, she paused to straighten a photograph that hung slightly crooked. It was new, added just last week. Nicholas and Thomas together, both laughing at something beyond the camera's view. Nicholas had finally been able to display pictures of his brother without pain overwhelming the joy. That alone proved he was ready to move forward. Without her. Victoria was writing the note when she heard his voice behind her. "You are leaving." She turned to find Nicholas standing in the doorway, still in his pajamas, hair disheveled from sleep. But his eyes were sharp, knowing. He had always been able to read her too well. "I have other commitments," she started, but he raised a hand to stop her. "Do not lie to me, Victoria. Not after everything we have shared. If you need to leave, then leave. But at least tell me the truth about why." The words stuck in her throat. How could she explain that she was terrified? That loving him felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, one strong breeze away from falling? That she could not survive losing someone else she cared about? "You do not need me anymore," she finally said. "Look at how far you have come. You are engaging with life again. This house feels alive. You have honored Thomas's memory while building your own future. My job here is done." Nicholas walked closer, his expression unreadable. "Is that really what you think? That you were just doing a job? What else would it be?" "Victoria." He said her name like a prayer, like a plea. "Do not do this. Do not run because you are scared. The truth emerges." The accusation landed like a physical blow. "I am not scared," she protested, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. "Yes, you are. And I understand why. I am terrified too." Nicholas closed the distance between them until they stood only feet apart. "Every day for 3 months I have watched you bring light into my darkness. You made me remember what it means to feel alive. And every day I have fallen more in love with you." Victoria's breath caught. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back, changing everything. "You cannot love me," she whispered. "I am just someone who cleans your house. Someone who happened to be there when you needed help. You are so much more than that, and you know it." His voice was gentle but firm. "You are the person who saw my pain and matched it with your own. Who taught me that grief does not have to be a life sentence. Who showed me that opening your heart again is not betraying those we have lost." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. "I cannot do this, Nicholas. I cannot love someone and risk losing them again. When James died, it almost destroyed me. I barely survived it. I cannot go through that again." "So your plan is to live half a life?" Nicholas reached up, gently wiping away her tears with his thumb. "To keep your heart so carefully guarded that nothing can touch it? That is not living, Victoria. That is just existing. And you deserve more than that. It is safer. Maybe. But is it worth it?" He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly tender. "I spent 2 years in this house, safe and isolated and utterly miserable. I thought that was what I deserved, punishment for failing to protect my brother. Then you walked in and showed me a different path. You taught me that healing is not about forgetting or moving on. It is about carrying our love forward into whatever comes next." The revelation. Victoria looked into his eyes and saw everything reflected there. Hope and fear. Love and vulnerability. A future full of possibilities and risks. The same things she felt churning inside her own heart. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I am so afraid of losing you." "I know. I am afraid too." Nicholas pressed his forehead against hers. But I would rather have whatever time we get together than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Would not you? The question pierced through all her carefully constructed defenses. She thought about James, about the 5 beautiful years they had shared before tragedy struck. If she had known how it would end, would she have chosen differently? Would she have walked away from all that joy to avoid the eventual pain? No. Never. Not for anything. James would want me to be happy, she said softly, the realization dawning. He would hate knowing I was hiding from life because I lost him. And Thomas would probably punch me if he knew I was letting you walk away. Nicholas smiled through his own tears. He always said I overthought everything, that sometimes you just have to take the leap. Victoria laughed despite herself, a sound that was half sob, half joy. We are both disasters. Perfect disasters. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. Stay, Victoria. Not as my housekeeper. Stay as yourself. Stay because you want to see where this goes. Stay because life is short and precious, and we deserve to grab whatever happiness we can find. Don't move. She opened her mouth to respond, but Nicholas suddenly held up a hand. His expression shifted to one of intense focus. Don't move, he whispered, exactly as he had that first morning. Victoria froze, confused. Then she heard it. A distinctive call from outside the window. She turned her head slowly and saw it perched on the same windowsill as before. The blue-crowned motmot, brilliant in the morning light, its tail feathers swaying gently in the breeze. They stood perfectly still, barely breathing, just as they had 3 months ago. But this time, Nicholas's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. This time, they were not strangers united by a moment of beauty. They were two people who had walked through darkness together and found their way to light. The bird stayed for nearly 10 minutes, preening its feathers, occasionally tilting its head to look at them through the glass. It seemed utterly at peace, comfortable in this space between wild and domestic, freedom and connection. When it finally took flight, disappearing into the spring morning, Victoria felt something inside her shift and settle. A decision made. A future chosen. She turned to Nicholas, and before she could second-guess herself, she kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, like testing the temperature of water before diving in. But then his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of promises and possibilities, of grief acknowledged and joy reclaimed. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. I am still terrified, Victoria admitted. Good. That means it matters. Nicholas brushed a strand of hair from her face. We can be terrified together. We can take it slow. We can honor what we have lost while building something new. But please, do not walk away because you are afraid. We have both spent enough time in the darkness. A new beginning. Victoria nodded, feeling lighter than she had in years. Okay. I will stay. Not as your housekeeper, but as someone who wants to see where this incredible, terrifying, beautiful thing between us leads. That is all I am asking. Nicholas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips again. One day at a time. One moment at a time. No guarantees except that we face whatever comes together. They spent the rest of the morning on the terrace, drinking coffee and watching the waves. Nicholas told her about a new project he was considering, something that would honor Thomas's memory while pushing technology forward. Victoria talked about maybe returning to physical therapy, using her gifts to help people heal in more direct ways. They made no grand plans, no sweeping declarations. They simply sat together in the sunshine, holding hands, occasionally stealing kisses, learning the new rhythm of being together not as patient and healer but as partners. The house comes alive. Over the following weeks, the mansion transformed yet again. Victoria moved in gradually, bringing pieces of herself into the space. Her books mingled with his on the shelves. Her plants joined his in the sunroom. Her laughter echoed through rooms that had known too much silence. They established new traditions. Morning coffee on the terrace. Evening walks along the beach. Sunday dinners where they cooked together, experimenting with recipes and making glorious mistakes. Nicholas taught Victoria to play piano, and though she was terrible at it, he never stopped encouraging her. She taught him to see beauty in imperfection, in the small domestic moments that make up a life. They talked about their lost loves often, keeping James and Thomas present without letting grief dominate. Victoria put up photographs of her husband alongside Nicholas's pictures of his brother. They toasted to absent friends on hard anniversaries. They learned that honoring the past did not mean being trapped by it. Some days were harder than others. Victoria still had moments where panic seized her, convinced that something terrible would happen. Nicholas still carried guilt about Thomas, probably always would. But they had learned to sit with these difficult emotions together, to offer comfort without trying to fix what could not be fixed. 6 months forward. On a brilliant autumn afternoon, exactly 6 months after Victoria had almost walked away, they stood together on the cliff edge behind the house. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, and the sky was that particular shade of blue that seems to exist only in California. Nicholas had been working on something for weeks, secretive and excited. Now he pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and opened it. Inside were 2 delicate pendants on silver chains. Each held a tiny blue feather. "I had these made," he explained. "From feathers the marmot left behind. I found them on the windowsill after it flew away. I know it is not a traditional gesture, but I wanted us both to have something that represents that moment. The first time we stood still together. The second time I asked you not to move." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes as he fastened one pendant around her neck. She took the second and did the same for him, her fingers gentle against his skin. "It is perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect." He pulled her close. "Perfectly imperfect. Perfectly human. Perfectly mine, if you will have me." "I will have you," she said, kissing him as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Today and tomorrow and whatever comes after. I will have you through the joy and the sorrow, the certainty and the fear. I will have you because loving you makes me braver than I ever thought possible." The story continues. As darkness fell, they walked back to the house hand in hand. Lights glowed from the windows, warm and welcoming. Music drifted out, a recording Nicholas had made of himself and Victoria attempting a duet, full of mistakes and laughter. Inside, dinner was waiting, the table set for 2, candles ready to be lit. This was home now. Not because it was perfect or because pain had been erased. It was home because 2 broken people had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful from their shared fragments. Because they had learned that love does not make you immune to loss, but it makes loss bearable. Because they understood that the greatest courage is not avoiding fear but walking forward despite it. The blue-crowned marmot never returned to their windowsill. But sometimes, on quiet mornings, they heard its distinctive call from somewhere in the coastal trees. A reminder of the moment that changed everything. Of the command that led not to fear but to freedom. Don't move. Stay present. Choose love. Live fully. The mansion on the cliff was no longer a monument to grief. It was a testament to healing, to hope, to the unexpected ways that broken hearts can find their way back to wholeness. And in the years that followed, it would witness even more transformations. Perhaps children's laughter echoing through the halls. Perhaps new traditions being built. Perhaps old wounds fully healing into scars that told stories rather than causing pain. But that was all ahead. For now, in this perfect moment, Victoria and Nicholas had everything they needed. Each other. Courage. Hope. And the unshakable certainty that choosing to love again, despite all the risks, was the bravest and most beautiful thing either of them had ever done. The ocean sang its eternal song. The stars emerged one by one. And inside the house that had once been a tomb but was now a home, two hearts beat in synchrony, alive and grateful and utterly, wonderfully whole. The end.